For years, Turkey's economic policymaking was a chaos of unorthodox policies, dwindling currency reserves, and interventionist measures that did more to enrich the elite than put the nation on stable financial footing. The consequences were dire, rampant inflation, a battered lira, and a loss of credibility on global markets. But in recent months, there have been glimmers of a great reorientation underway. The new administration of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has made overtures toward rehabilitating the nation's finances and monetary policy. The symbolic epicenter is the central bank under Governor Fatih Karahan. In my discussions with Karahan this week, a picture emerged of an institution working diligently to clean up the rubble of the past decade's economic mismanagement. It is a long, arduous road back from the brink. But Karahan exudes a quiet determination to reestablish Turkey's economic bona fides. We have largely eliminated swaps with domestic banks and are now reviewing deposit agreements with international counterparties, he told me matter-of-factly in his office at the imposing central bank headquarters in Istanbul's Eminönü quarter. Such deposits have already been lowered by $1.5 billion over the last 3 months, and there's a roadmap to further reduce these liabilities in due course. The deposits Karahan referenced are part of the vast web of unconventional arrangements Turkey's monetary authorities had entered into during the country's seemingly endless cycle of currency defenses and balance of payments crises. In a desperate bid to replenish dangerously depleted foreign exchange reserves, the central bank amassed around $20 billion in deposits and swap lines from nations like China, Qatar, South Korea, and the United Arab Emirates. It was an unseemly state of affairs for what was once an economic powerhouse and rising star among emerging markets. The murkiness surrounding these arrangements' details were never fully disclosed, only fueled perceptions that Turkey was conducting its economic policies in opaque, improvisational ways disconnected from institutional norms. That era, it seems, is being ushered into the history books, though the path ahead is still rife with challenges. Unwinding the tangled skein of liabilities will require deft management over years. Some of the debris is still yet to be catalogued. One deal from last year underscored the scale of foreign bailouts Turkey had been relying on to remain economically afloat. Ahead of national elections, Saudi Arabia's government announced it had extended a staggering $5 billion lifeline to the Turkish central bank through the Saudi Fund for Development. It was a humbling acknowledgement of how far Turkey's fundamentals had deteriorated. The secrecy around the Saudi deal was a characteristic of Turkey's policymaking during crisis years. Another example involves what appears to be a $1.1 billion short-term deposit the central bank accepted from Azerbaijan's sovereign wealth fund. The details remain hazy. The deposit was never publicly acknowledged by Turkish officials, only confirmed by statements out of Baku that it has been extended at least once. Karahan was circumspect when I pressed him on these specifics, perhaps understandably wary of litigating past decisions made under the prior profligate regime of Erdogan ally Murat Weissel, who was dismissed as central bank chief in 2021. Weissel's tenure saw the largest and most aggressive depletion of reserves through unremitting currency interventions. I prefer not to comment on confidential arrangements involving other institutions, Karahan told me. Our focus is on strengthening our reserve position and policy frameworks going forward. It's that forward-looking disposition that may ultimately define Karahan's own legacy at the Hilltop Central Bank headquarters overlooking the Golden Horn. At 48 years old, he is being handed the daunting task of rehabilitating an institution and policy thrust that burned years of hard-won credibility. His mission is made more challenging by the magnitude of the damage. During my visit, I repeatedly heard despair from economic observers over how Turkey had squandered its once promising trajectory. Over turkey wraps at a cafe near Taksim Square, a Western economics professor who concentrates on emerging markets bemoaned how Turkish policymaking had become unhinged from reality. An entrepreneur who recently relocated his manufacturing business from Turkey to Bulgaria cited the need for a predictable economic environment untainted by politics. A refrain I heard time and again was that Turkey, through its series of unforced economic policy errors stretching back years, had tragically transgressed against the ethos of economic institutions over economic circumstances. By that maxim, steadfast institutional fortitude and consistency ultimately matters more than any prevailing set of economic data or conditions. In Turkey's case, political forces so deeply perverted the policymaking apparatus that they undermined the very set of economic institutions, central bank independence, market-based policies, transparency, that were meant to insulate the nation during volatile periods. The result was a vicious cycle of permanently diminishing confidence, currency chaos, reserve depletion, and eventually economic stagnation that immiserated millions of Turkish families. As one pro-government newspaper editor bluntly acknowledged to me, "We are paying the price for years of economic mismanagement and unorthodoxy. Can that decades-long pattern be reversed?" It's the 6 trillion lira question looming over Karahan and his team of reformers. To his credit, the governor seems to grasp the enormity of the challenge at hand. In our discussions, he was sanguine about the depth of repair work required, but realistic about the lengthy timelines. Despite recent inflows that caused reserves to spike $79 billion last quarter alone, he confessed Turkey's buffer is still below adequacy metrics. "We would like to further strengthen our reserves," he said, fully owning the current vulnerabilities. "But our primary goal is achieving disinflation in line with our targets. The bank will continue to accumulate reserves as market conditions allow." It's a judicious approach and one that aligns with Karahan's reserved, technocratic manner. He seems to recognize that regaining faith will hinge on incremental, perseverant actions over rhetoric. In this vein, the central bank has already begun taking concrete steps beyond optimizing its balance sheet. It has reinstated a credible monetary policy framework focused on taming inflation, with interest rates ratcheted up to nearly 16%. Capital controls have been dismantled and the lira allowed to float more freely. Badly needed institutional housecleaning has commenced, with an overhaul of personnel and new accountability systems installed. For global investors and Turkey's economic well-being, these measures are encouraging signs after years of chaos. But understandably, the outside world is taking a trust but verify stance. As one U.S. diplomat directly warned me, "Fine words buttered no parsnips. Only a prolonged period of fidelity to economic norms will surmount the credibility deficit." Within Turkey itself, skepticism also runs rampant, and for good reason. The scars of past crises that impoverished many run deep. In conversations with small business owners, retirees, and university students from Kadıköy to Besiktas, I was struck by the crushing weight of economic anxiety and pessimism that has set in. Taksim Square, usually a hive of commerce and cafe culture, had an oddly enervated feel during my visit, as if the area's economic vitality had been sapped. "We've heard too many empty promises," a kebab shop owner named Emre told me, letting out a fatigued sigh. "We'll believe this fresh start when we see it with our own eyes." It's this crisis of confidence among global investors, Turkish businesses, and crucially, the nation's citizens themselves, that looms as Karahan's biggest obstacle. Reputations matter, and Turkey's has taken a severe battering from repeated betrayals of the economic and monetary norms it once purported to uphold. The fatalism I encountered in Istanbul calls to mind the famous proverb about how it takes years to build a formidable edifice of stakeholder trust and credibility, but it can be razed in an instant. After over a decade of unremitting demolition efforts by their own policymakers, the burning question is whether Turkey can muster the diligence to steadily reconstruct what was so wantonly abandoned. If my time with Governor Karahan is any indication, Turkey at least stands a fighting chance. He approaches the task with competence and pragmatism, devoid of the bombast and ideological dogma that has plagued the country's previous economic managers. In the antiseptic confines of the central bank's executive offices, Karahan and his team project a workmanlike demeanor focused on the painstaking process of reconstruction. There is no triumphal messaging or unjustified victory laps. Just yeoman's work lies ahead. "We have much to do to regain international confidence and put Turkey's policy framework on a sustainable, institutional footing," Karahan acknowledged with characteristic modesty. "It will be a multi-year journey requiring patience and consistency." That humble, reality-based mindset may be Turkey's most powerful asset as it embarks on its road back from the economic abyss. After enduring so many years of hubristic, quixotic policymaking divorced from constraints, the nation could use a recalibration toward diligence and institutional integrity. In this spirit, I was struck by how Karahan seemed to recognize that his core mission extends well beyond mere economic stewardship. At its heart, the endeavor he has been entrusted with is more fundamentally one of restoring societal confidence and hope. For too long, our citizens have been deprived of the foundations necessary for economic security and upward mobility, he reflected. We must show them a better way through our actions, not more empty promises, but lasting reforms that translate into stability and opportunity. It's that civic consciousness that could ultimately make or break Turkey's economic revival. Nations are not just assemblages of data or organizational flowcharts. They are human enterprises built on durable norms, mutual trust between leaders and the governed, and faith in an equitable system working for the broader good. Those intangible pillars of national confidence have been so badly shaken in Turkey over the past turbulent decade. It has been a traumatic era for the country's 85 million residents, marked by skyrocketing costs of living, stagnant wages, and a profound sense of instability and unease. Everywhere I traveled, from the trendy cafes of Sahangir to the bustling shops of the Spice Bazaar, interactions with everyday Turks conveyed palpable economic anxiety. It's a social strain that cannot be easily remedied through monetary tools and technical adjustments alone, which is why Karahan and the new economic team would be wise to view their mandate as going beyond just restoring institutional guardrails. Ultimately, they must rekindle belief in something larger, Turkey's economic promise and potential as a dynamic, opportunity-rich society integrated with the global economy. It's an uphill struggle after so many self-inflicted wounds. But the nation has enduring strengths to build upon, if only it can rediscover them. Turkey's geographical advantages as a geographic crossroads straddling Europe and Asia are self-evident. Its youthful demographics, with a median age of just 32, afford a potent human capital engine. And its rich civilizational heritage intertwining cultures and commerce gives it unique soft power reserves awaiting rejuvenation. Moreover, Turkey's modern economic track record reminds us of its substantial unfulfilled promise. Just 2 decades ago, it emerged as a shining democratizing light and accomplished a stunning feat of reducing inflation from 70% to 7% in just 18 months. In the early 2000s, its GDP per capita grew 5-fold as it modernized rapidly. For a time, Turkey seemed to have it all: soaring growth, tamed inflation, rising incomes that expanded its middle class, and growing integration into Europe's economic orbit. The future appeared blindingly bright. That Turkey circa 2007, with its gleaming new airports and megaprojects, felt as if it was being turbocharged into the ranks of the world's great economic powers. An ebullient Erdogan captured the national mood, boasting of his aspiration for Turkey to be counted among the world's 10 biggest economies by 2023. How tragically those dreams dissipated over the ensuing decade and a half. Economists I spoke with cited a litany of policy missteps that ultimately squandered Turkey's vast potential. Heavy-handed interference in markets through price fixing, protectionist measures, and rapid nationalization of the private sector spooked international capital flows. An ideological hostility toward institutional independence eroded faith in economic governance. And a descent into currency mercantilism coupled with fiscally profligate spending ultimately culminated in a crisis that still reverberates. We had a tendency to confuse economic growth with true development, lamented Danny Roderick, a Turkish economist at Harvard University, in an interview. When the authoritarian populism took over, it upended all the norms and guardrails producing sustainable progress.